2 minutes.
We'll just wait till
You collecting it?
Yeah.
it's way around. Chelsea for the day.
He's guessed.
He's a guest,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. All right, so attendance. Scott Mullins. Both of our Andrews are. I'm here, Anna's here. And then Bestie. And Tom. Oh, sorry, and Tom. Sorry, totally
was
just
hiding
skipped
him.
right past you. I know, sorry, and Tom is here. Okay, public comment. If you wish to address the board under public comment, please here for the time limit of 3 minutes per speaker. We expect comments to be civil, disrespectful, or disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. The board is not authorized under the Colorado Open Meetings Law to discuss, comment, or take action at this meeting on any issue raised by the public comment that is not a part of tonight's agenda. Yeah. Go for it.
I'm Pam Chadbourne. I'm a block and a half from here. Wanted to say a greenhouse gas inventory is okay. It's unclear to me as a member of the public that I don't understand the connections between the greenhouse gas inventory and policies and actions that are possible to take. Cities have certain powers. There are things we can do that are realistic at this time and productive and that fit Littleton, which is kind of suburban character, smart growth, incremental over time, leave spaces and use water wisely. Those are kind of things that provide good future returns to the community, like buildings built now that are going to last for 80 years. They've got to be better than the ones we have or the ones that are being built under the new code. So we need some city competencies. We need a budget process that includes estimates for grants and incentives to developers for building sustainable and accessible housing. And waste diversion pickup. I lived in California. I've lived in apartments where the waste pickup guys cannot get into the parking lots to pick up the recycling. We need to avoid that. We have our code, and I think we're recreating that problem. We need immediate correction of that problem. It's zoning, we can do it. Let's do it. And we need to build buildings with insulation and energy saving HVAC. We have missed that for 3,000 housing units. It is appalling. So, and then we need to be ready for any, you mentioned your last meeting, provider responsibility income. We need a budget process that kind of estimates we should have cost estimates for all of this stuff. And then we'd have departments within the city that are ready to answer these questions when they come up. We should restore the city's hazardous waste collection and the large item drop off. Those are good pollution preventing things. And then what we need a model lighting ordinance back again. We need community gardens. We need a major revision of the zoning map and zoning for more open space. And then around these new buildings with smart water use to have decent humidity, which is cooling to avoid the heat island effect. I guarantee you, we're just building heat island effect in. The model lighting ordinance we had from 2000 to 2010, a libertarian presider of council directed staff to take it out, and it was a 4-3 vote. We need it back. And Aspen Grove folks mentioned this last month. They said it's not compatible with 50s. It actually is totally, the 50s were better with lighting management than we are today. So we need that back. Community gardens, the data that we only have 2 and 1 is undersubscribed. We need more, and we need to attract people, build and they will come. And so we'll have that. And I could obviously go on as always, but thank you very much for listening.
Yes.
My name is Ryan Delaney. I'm a founder of a Littleton-based startup.
that works on methane emissions. We go out to the mountains and we find coal mines that are leaking large amounts of methane. And what we've done is take bacteria that grow in the soil at these sites, and we've identified species that are very hyperactive because they've been exposed to elevated methane for long periods of time. And then we use them to clean up methane leaks in different areas. So we worked on several mine sites, one out by Carbondale, one out by Paonia. And we're gonna be working on natural gas sites up near Greeley soon. And I was looking for a sort of city to work on with a sort of pilot project. I wouldn't be asking for any money, just to be able to do a partnership and pilot with. Testing sort of small scale bioreactors on methane diversion systems that are used in urban spaces. These would be like, if you're building on sort of a swampy area or someplace that has underground methane generation, you need to build in piping systems underground that are diverted. I don't know specifically how much of that is used in different areas in Littleton, but I'm just looking to test out this technology so that I can kind of build on it a little bit for the future. So, and like I said, I'm a Littleton-based business, so. Or maybe we can discuss something.
Yeah, as I say, usually during the public comment, it's usually not that kind of back and forth, but if you leave your information, I think folks can feel free to contact you for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I do.
Still like a minute left if there's anything else you want.
Whatever's on your mind, we should use that.
Yeah, sorry. No, that's about it.
Thanks for being brief.
Thank you.
One of my knowledge.
Okay, are we ready to move on to the first agenda item? Yeah.
Well, I can never get the boxes to go with me. All right. So yeah, I wanted to present to the Environmental Stewardship Board the findings from the greenhouse gas inventory that I've been working on since about October. So at the end of the day is just to quickly at a high level go over what I mean when I say this, what the inventory looks like in most places, as well as the protocol that we followed, and then the results comparing to some peer cities, as well as looking at the local government operations inventory, because I did complete two, but I'll explain exactly sort of how those interact, commingle with one another. So we're just gonna start off from the basics. You might remember this from 8th grade science. I certainly kind of did. But then I went to grad school, now I really know it well. So anyhow, greenhouse gas, or GHG for short, so you'll see that abbreviation a lot. Basically just trapping a lot of this into the atmosphere and essentially like taking a lot of the sun's heat and exacerbating it into the atmosphere. I don't know how much we want to go into this, but it's like solar radiation goes through the atmosphere, and then most of the energy is then absorbed through Earth and then trapped by greenhouse gases, which causes more warming. So they like trap that heat essentially on the surface and lower the atmosphere. So if anyone has any questions, happy to I'm gonna send all the slides and hopefully get them posted too for the public. But this is kind of the more technical aspect of these are the primary types of greenhouse gases that are measured in a typical inventory. There's a couple more, but these are the biggest ones of note. And so when we say something global warming potential, if carbon dioxide is like a unit of 1, it's essentially multiplied by 29.8 for any type of methane. So I'm sure you could speak to this more, but than I can even, but it's anything that emits methane has a much worse impact, is basically what this says, on our environment than carbon dioxide. But we basically can report and use these equivalents to report them all out as something called a carbon dioxide equivalent, or CO2e. So when you look at the different types of gases, a lot of those conversions are done through different types of calculators. So it's kind of exactly what I did for this. And then the most recent update is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And so that the last report was 2023. That's the year that I looked at for all of the data. So it's the 6th assessment report. Happy to go into that more too if people want. But another important thing to note is there are different scopes. And it probably sounds like I'm speaking another language, but basically, if you look at this graph, it's what is in scope 1. So that's like pretty tangible direct emissions, like coming outside of your tailpipe, maybe coming from your fireplace. If there's a large landfill in a jurisdiction's boundaries, what does that emit? Scope 2 gets a little bit more nuanced and are considered indirect emissions, often associated with consumption of purchased or acquired like electricity or steam or heating and cooling. And then scope 3 is basically all other emissions or trans-boundary transportation or exported waste. So maybe we produce the waste, but the landfill is not in our jurisdictional boundaries, it's somewhere else. So someone else claims that emissions probably is scope 1, whereas we claim it as scope 3. And that kind of changes the lens, and I'll be able to show you that a little bit more visually once I break down some of the specific data for the local government operations inventory. But I think just sort of on a high level, also RECs, is renewable energy credits. There are also items that you could consider information only or optional. Not really much of what I did was information only, just based on the scope of work that I was working off of, and we didn't really look at carbon offsets and renewable energy credits, because as a city, we're not really doing that on the local level. So that's just a little bit more data there. So there's a community-wide inventory, and these are all of the elements that captures. So it might be looking at electricity, natural gas, other fuels, also including like propane, kerosene, wood, distillate fuel oil, number 2, which is also kind of random, and then all types of renewable fuel use. So that includes like on transportation and off-road equipment, as well as any type of solid waste generation, which I mostly use a lot of the data from the waste plan. So I can also show y'all all of that data too. And then wastewater treatment, as well as fugitive emissions.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
So when you say community-wide greenhouse gas inventory, is this, like, because I know you did a greenhouse gas inventory for the city, and when you say community-wide, is that including community activities that are not owned by the city, or is it something that you'll clarify later on?
I will, but I can clarify it now. So it's kind of confusing. When I say community-wide, that includes government operations. So anytime anyone does an inventory and they just do community-wide, you're including all of the city's buildings, because it's like cataloged as commercial if you look at any type of Excel energy report. However, what I did is I singled it out. So I was like, what are our emissions for all of our buildings, for the fleet?
City-owned buildings.
Yes, city-owned and operated buildings, for employees' commute. So that could be people that are coming from all over. What does that look like? What does our actual city fleet look like? Because if you don't, it's all kind of captured in the community emissions, but you don't actually know the specific data and the lever points, I suppose, if you aren't able to sort of take it out. So that's kind of what it looks like. Like if you look at community-wide, it's kind of that big blue circle. It includes all of local government operations. But the second inventory was just me singling it out so that we can also, as a city, walk the walk and hopefully do the things alongside the community.
Okay, so when you say community emissions, that includes like my house and the
Yes.
business, the
It includes
building of
this
business.
building.
And then when you say government operations, that's like just the subsect of city-owned
Yes.
things. Okay.
Yeah, and so like the city also owns and operates South Platte Renew. So I'm gonna get into that more because that kind of skews a little bit of some of this data. So coming back here, this is sort of the complex calculations that I could go into more. I will say that through the partnership with ICLEI, which you'll see sort of all over the presentation, there's a way you could do this all by hand, but we would probably be here 2 years from now, and you wouldn't want that. So they have like a big inventory called ClearPath. And so a lot of those calculations, I like worked with them to make data ready to put into their system. And then they spit out calculations based on different emissions factors. So that might be, based on like the average number of miles per gallon for vehicles driven in like the Rocky Mountain region. They've come up with like these very specific numbers. It's definitely pretty nuanced. I'm happy to share any of this data too, but it's a little bit of a slog. And so this is just a little bit about like, okay, well, why are we here? And it's very difficult to implement any type of action, as y'all know from you identifying in the environmental stewardship plan. This is one of the key priorities, which I really appreciated, because how can you measure where you're at and figure out how to improve without knowing that baseline? So this is the baseline inventory. We don't have anything else for the city specifically to compare it to, but hopefully they say like 3 to 5 years, depending on, where we're at in interventions, to do this again and measure, okay, what were our reductions? So we meet these goals that we're setting out. And then it also allows you to forecast, okay, what happens if we do nothing? What does it look like based on population increase, based on increase in commercial operations? But then you can also model all of these different reduction scenarios. So like, say we were to make this entire building all electric, what would that do to the entire city of Littleton's emissions profile? So looking at all of that, there are different ways that they're modeling, and so I'm also working with ICLEI to help, because it's a very like complex mathematical process for it. And so they're helping figure out those reductions, and they're gonna sort of have this called climate modeling and wedge analysis. So that'll sort of be the like intermediary into the climate action plan, so we can better understand what the best levers are in terms of reducing the actual number of emissions that we emit. There's also got something called science-based targets. You may have heard of these. It's very common that cities, counties, states, countries have these different, types of targets, but basically it's like when you see something like a 2030 target that reflects maximum effort towards or beyond a fair share of 50% of CO2 reductions by 2030. So it's like saying, based on XYZ available science, we're going to make this goal of this many reductions. It's also aligned with like the 1.5% degree Celsius cap, but I'm pretty sure we passed that a year or two ago. So here we are. We're just gonna keep going. And yeah, I think it's also aligning with like different state goals and previous federal goals. So it's just like one way to like think about this framework, and it's a term that's used a lot in the industry. This is just a little bit more about forecasting, and so understanding like our fuel efficiency and what happens if it is business as usual, and so what that whole thing like looks like. And then looking at GHG reduction strategies, so actually getting into the meat of it, and then you can apply that to different types of forecast emissions. So the nuances of this I'll bring everyone along with, but I think the most important thing is that this is where a great starting point to understand exactly what's the lowest hanging fruit, like what can we actually do. So this is gonna look like an absolutely terrible chart, and I think honestly I'm gonna send out my entire report too. It's like 26 pages, and it has all the data sources and everything and all of these numbers crunched. I know for a lot of us this probably doesn't mean a lot, so I kind of wanted to skip ahead to just the overall graph, just so you can get a better breakdown. And then I have all of the specific percentages too. So where is that?
Well, I was just wondering, what's the error on the estimate? Now, how good is your estimate of the emissions in the community?
So ICLEI did like a quality assistance, quality control check, and they said that like it's within like a scientifically valid margin of error, which I believe is like plus or minus 5% or something.
5%?
I believe that's like the standard, like R equals 0 0.5 or something.
Okay.
Is it, I'm pretty sure, but I can double check with them and get back to you about like how, you know, the different areas. And I mean, there are things that were not captured in this because I would have definitely needed to hire a consultant and there wasn't any funds like put aside for that when I first started. So that could be something that we look at in the future, but if you think about like every Amazon box that comes into the community, like all of that isn't really captured here. That's all scope 3. And I have friends that are consultants for scope 3 and that's all they do. And it's like their whole life. And so
This is scope 1 and 2.
it's mostly scope 1 and 2. I think there's like a little bit of scope 3 that might have like come in there based on the waste stuff and what we export, but yeah, mostly it's scope 1 and 2. And I wish I like could have done scope 3, but
Scope 3 is a bear, yeah.
yeah, it would have taken probably another year, unless we hired someone, but if we had more capital to do that, right? So,
What are your percentages? You said you have.
yeah, I have all of the percentages, I'm down here. I also have them in my notes, so I can. That's the next one. Oh, here they are. So we've got commercial energy is the largest at 33.05%. Transportation and mobile is the second largest, and residential energy is the third. So when we look back at this, you can see that commercial is the green, transportation is the yellow, and blue is residential, and that the rest of it is a very small portion. It does not mean that a lot of that scope 3 particularly for solid waste really is not captured because we do not have a landfill within our boundaries. So like knowing the methane leaks and all of that for said landfill is very hard to know, particularly with 14+ haulers, because they probably go to a bunch of different landfills. So I couldn't even really measure that based on just the sheer number of haulers. So I feel like that might also be a little bit off. The other two should not be. Water and wastewater. South Platte Renew has very robust data.
And so for residential and commercial energy, does that include electricity and like natural gas usage then?
Yes. So natural gas is usually in therms and electricity in kilowatt hours. And there's a way to do like equivalencies of like therms to kilowatt hours.
And transportation and mobile sources, does that also include commercial transportation, or is commercial transportation included in commercial energy?
No, it's all, anything that's on the road is transportation. And commercial energy is the footprint of like all of the businesses in terms of like their buildings. It doesn't necessarily, yeah, basically. It doesn't really separate, oh, we know that this truck belongs to Safeway. It just, that's not really how.
Saying we think there's an estimate like this number of cars on the road or trucks on the road, and so.
Yeah, that's like
a pure.
It's all like on-road transportation and a lot of off-road. The city's fleet is included into that, but I'll show you like the separate analysis of that too. So I mean, this is pretty typical.
What's included in process and fugitive emissions for this? It's tiny compared to.
Yeah, it is very tiny. That is the transportation of said gases, I believe, and like the amount that like that emits.
Transmission pipeline.
Like the amount of leakage in the pipelines, I'm like 99.9% sure that's all leakage. So that's mostly from EPA flight data for the most part, as well as there's a different calculation that I crunched, and it might have been also through an EPA number and website. But it's all, I can send all of the links to.
I mean, it's actually up there, the fugitive emissions from natural gas distribution, so.
Yeah, and it's usually from leakages for the most part.
There's someone here who can help with that.
True. And so this is a comparison. I will say that the comparison, it's a little tough to compare. It's pretty easy to compare to Englewood because I worked pretty closely with their sustainability manager and know kind of what they did. And they're a smaller community in terms of population, as you see, but they have overall less emissions, but they have higher in other sectors. So it says that it's residential energy, commercial and industrial energy, residential natural gas, commercial and industrial natural gas. But I think everyone would have had to squint if you could see all the words. But when I send it out, you can click on the boxes and it like says exactly what it is.
Is their decimal placed in the right spot?
Doesn't seem right.
For which one?
If you look at
Residential.
residential, we're 61,000. They're 1,000,000 behind.
109 million.
More than a.
So
It looks like the decimal across the board might be.
So I actually don't think that it is, however, this doesn't include transportation, like this is only looking at a snapshot of.
When you look at like the total emissions,
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Getting at, it's total amongst all.
Like, it looks like it's just a factor of 1,000.
Snapshot of the category.
Yeah, actually, I feel like it definitely has to be.
Yeah, it's off, it's like more than a factor.
Well, I'm glad y'all caught that I'm presenting to you before
My
sending
engineering
to
brain
council.
could not handle it.
Yeah.
My policy brain was like, hold up, 1 second. But no, that's helpful. Maybe I'll send out a revised version and see if Mel can take a look, or if anyone here wants to take a look and,
Cut the slide.
I mean, yeah, I don't actually think this slide provides a whole lot, cause it's very difficult to compare.
But it is per.
I was gonna say, I'd wanna see it per capita. I think that'd be really interesting to see per capita what like residential emissions are and even commercial and industrial, but it doesn't, it's, yeah, it's not like an apples to apples comparison.
Better than
Eh.
I've seen Woodward.
I would say though that like overall, we would probably still be doing worse than like Lakewood, even though theirs looks, they're 3 times our size. They also included all of their scope 3 because this is like their 4th. They're like 20 years ahead of us, so I will also point that out, but they are a neighboring community. Yeah, let me look at these numbers and redo this one.
It's jumping all over your PowerPoint.
Our overall number of 464,000 tons, this is tons per year.
Metric tons.
Metric tons per, yeah. Oh, metric tons per year, okay.
Metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents.
So that is the equivalent of roughly cutting down like 100,000 acres of tropical forest per year. Yeah.
Cute.
So think about that.
Cloning a million seeds.
Love that. Yeah, so what do we do from here? These are very like typical recommendations based on our inventory, but this is something that we'll talk and discuss. This is more just sort of an initial roadmap of, okay, how do we reduce transportation, promote EVs, incentivize energy efficiency, increase use of renewables. It's kind of all of the problem areas that you would think it is for our community-wide emissions. It's very similar to other communities. And there's not too much that shocks me about the community-wide one, other than residential is a little bit higher than other communities, but I do think we're a big residential community, so it might make a little bit more sense. But maybe there's ways that we can engage community members and how we make savings and things into solar and all of that. So this is just kind of at a high level. This is sort of what I was explaining, that the local government operations is just a subset of the community emissions. So it's pulling out this data to figure out how the city itself can reduce emissions based on our own operations. So I didn't go through all of the data like the other one. So the bottom number is the total of metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent that the city emits. However, it looks like it's all water and wastewater. And I will explain why. So when you look at a community-wide inventory, you're looking at jurisdictional bounds. So we're looking at specifically incorporated Littleton, and we're looking at all the things that take place within the city. For a local government operations lens, you look at what we have operational and financial control over. So this is sort of an explanation. We co-own and co-operate South Platte Renew with Englewood. They are not a special district as a water district, so the two cities are claiming basically all of these emissions that aren't necessarily all really coming from Littleton. They are scaled by population a bit, but it's hard to do that because it's not like South Platte Renew is like, I know that this goes to these specific houses or these specific communities. So for community-wide, it's considered scope 3 for us, so it looks a little bit more normal because it's technically in the bounds of Englewood. It's in Englewood's city boundaries, but for the local government operations, it kind of skews, I think it really skews the data and where the best intervention points are. And also because South Platte Renew is a big leader in sustainability. The biogas, is it treatment? Is that the right word? Biogas? Collection.
Sure, and reuse.
Right, and you're partnering with them too, Breck, and like they have been a leader. They've had sustainability staff for many years. I've talked with multiple of them, and I think it's really just kind of boils down to when I was talking to them, they're like, well, if we had our own district, you wouldn't have to even claim all of this, right? It's just because of the way that this kind of shakes out.
And you said it can't be divided between Littleton and Englewood?
Oh, it is.
Oh, it is. Okay, so what we're seeing is our like share of their.
Yes, but we have to claim half and Englewood has to claim half because we each have 50% of operational and financial control over the facility.
What about, I mean, I assume that South Platte Renew also treats wastewater from outside,
Yes,
like,
we
so,
have to claim it.
okay.
Just in this one, not in the community wide. You saw it was more normal.
Right.
However, in my report, I say, that's silly. Let's see what it looks like without it. Because I just feel like it's not actually the best point of intervention because they actually are doing a really good job on sustainability. And so I wanted to reframe this as like, all right, so what does it really look like when we take this out? And so buildings and facilities, I think that's around 56.8%. So that's all of city-owned buildings and properties. The next is vehicle fleet, so all the cop cars, all of the grounds, like everyone that has any type of city vehicle. And then the third is employee commute. So that's anyone that is driving or traveling into the community, and I believe that's 13%, yeah. So these are sort of the overall breakdowns of those three, seeing that buildings and facilities is really the largest source by a good number, which also does not surprise me based on all of the data that I went through, and based on the buildings profiles.
Is that always true that in a greenhouse gas inventory, a community like Littleton would claim sort of endpoint emissions where there's some kind of flow or commodity chain involved? And of course, I'm gonna be thinking about food.
So only if the city has usually like basically all of its operational control so that it is within the city's power to make the change because they are the entity that operates and finances said entity. And so we 50% operate and finance it, so we claim half, and that's just kind of how that goes. Englewood also has claimed half. Theirs looks way worse because in their community emissions, it's in their boundaries. So they have to claim it as scope 1 for both local government operations and community-wide, whereas for community-wide, because it's boundaries, we claim it as scope 3, which you saw really reduced it to look normal and probably closer to what it actually is. Versus the government operations, it's because it's a joint operation.
Is that a conversation that's happening anywhere with regard to greenhouse gas emissions? Is sort of consumption of greenhouse gas emissions that are produced elsewhere with regard to food, like to Pam's point earlier, community gardens, et cetera. Global food production would matter as far as the community's real impact on regional, global greenhouse gas emissions.
Typically a community that's much, so the city of Boulder probably at this point has gotten there where they're like, let's actually take a look at our agricultural production and how we can reduce emissions this way because they've hit these huge ones for years. We are starting at a very different point, and so looking at if we're just looking at greenhouse gases, that's not to say the benefits it provides to soil, to ecosystems, to people, to wildlife, like all the things that you're thinking of, it's not really captured when you look at just the picture of emissions, right? There is something that's always gonna be missing, but I mean, we know our issue is regional transportation. I could tell you it's the buildings, like without even blinking an eye, like think about how cold it is in here. Right? Like when you think about it, there is a reason and there's a way that it's happening. And if it's not happening through renewable energy, through heat pumps, through passive house standards, through like leads, then it's just pumping out all of the bad things, and it's going to always show those as the biggest offenders.
This is kind of an aside, Scott, but and I don't think this necessarily answers your question, but for urban agriculture, the greenhouse gas protocol does have some interesting, like when you convert land that was not agricultural before or did not have like green plants on it, that basically becomes a carbon sink. And like if it was land, like it's one thing if it was a rainforest and you cut it down, right? Then you're like actually losing carbon. But if there was, say it was a, a field where nothing was on it and we planted a bunch of trees, technically you can start claiming like credits more or less. But I think that they would probably be small in comparison to what we need to tackle from what Laura's showing. But it is interesting that like urban agriculture could theoretically become a carbon sink if you're converting land that was not previously agricultural, and different crops have different, like.
Yeah, you think about the water business too, and that electricity.
This is a super valuable tool. I just think there's a limitation where you could drive EV all day, eat beef all night, and your community would not be meaningfully impacting the global issue of climate change. And I'm wondering just why it's not captured. So it's not just about local food production, though. That's part of it. It's about sort of endpoint consumption habits and how that involves a global issue. And we're talking just about local solutions.
Right. No, I totally get it. And I think that we can still make that a part of the climate action plan. The entire climate action plan will not only be guided on this, but in terms of like consumption of energy, it should be for these measures. That does not mean we can't have a land use and agricultural component that is looking at more like what Damien was getting at, right? Looking at more of those levers too, because there is no silver bullet for the climate crisis, as probably everyone in this room knows. It's a lot of people doing a lot of little things over a long period of time. And so I don't disagree that exactly what Hannah is saying. Again, I could have calculated the amount of carbon with trees in the community. I don't think that we have the right inventory, and also it becomes very difficult with South Suburban because we don't have operational control, we have financial control, and so then it was like South Suburban isn't really considered part of like the local government operations because we don't have full operational control over them the way that we do for South Platte Renew. It sounds crazy, but.
But as a tool, for public communications into the future, I mean, like, at least, some of the stuff, especially to this group of well-educated and informed citizenry, like, some of this stuff may seem obvious and wanting for that deeper impact, but I think even members of the public would be, shocked to know that residential emissions account for 1/3 of the total of the cities. Considering we're also like 90% of the land use is purely residential. I think it's gonna prove to be, as it becomes more sophisticated in the future, even looking, for example, at our wastewater emissions, like the amount of impact you can have on putting in like fine aeration diffusers on energy consumption at a wastewater facility has enormous impacts on your total emissions overall.
Definitely. And I also did look up, like, we don't have huge significant emitting industries. Like the EPA didn't consider any of them significant enough to report out. So that's why it says only commercial, not commercial and industrial, because our industry here compared to somewhere like Sheridan is non-existent. They didn't categorize any of it. Same with solid waste landfill operations. We don't have any landfills in our boundaries, and we don't own or operate any. So like that stuff isn't fully captured. There also was not enough farmland for them to consider it worthy of me including it. That does not mean that we couldn't convert like empty fields into that and then do the reverse, right? But I don't think the existing amount necessarily showed enough of a reduction or contribution for that was like mathematically significant.
Yeah, and again, I think this is a great tool and a great starting point. Any tool's gonna have limitations. And I don't wanna go too far afield. It's just another question out of curiosity. Does any conversation about climate inventories anywhere factor in carbon debts? If you start seeing that transition to green energy and so on, because EVs and LEED certified buildings don't.
Do you mean like renewable energy credits or like
No, I mean-
trading?
I mean, like, okay, now we're doing EVs and LEED certified buildings, and all the stuff that goes into the manufacture and construction of those things involves a carbon net somewhere.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So that's.
Theoretically, that's like scope 3.
That is why scope 3 is so complicated, because I would need to know the emissions of the lumber that you are using to build your home. Right? If we think about that and that amount of embodied carbon that we're losing, anytime we have construction demolition, like that is what scope 3 is. That is why it is so intensely complicated. And I think there's a time and space that the city will probably want to do the inventory the same way for in 3 to 5 years. However, maybe there's an addition where we say, okay, it might not look like we're there reductions because we're gonna add on this more robust data set where we look at that, where we probably hire an expert that does it for their full-time job.
Some of that would probably fall more into like life cycle assessment of the materials that you're buying, but all of that kind of falls under scope 3.
I think it also goes to an advocacy point. It's not just transitioning technologies, it's also a question of just considering the last period.
Well, yes, that would be wonderful.
The other thing that I also wanna,
Wrong.
Preaches to the choir.
the other thing that I wanna call out is that
List.
like a greenhouse gas inventory is like has been mentioned a few times is a data point. But I think in like the sustainability world, a lot of times it's called carbon tunnel vision, where the people start to think that the greenhouse gas inventory is the end all be all, when really it is a piece of information to inform certain decisions, but it is not the only piece. So I think that maybe that also is kind of maybe what you're feeling a little bit is like kind of this, again, they call it carbon tunnel vision of like, you must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to prevent global warming. And like, yes, that is a huge component to it, but it is not the only component. And that's where like life cycle assessment starts to come into play, because life cycle assessment not only looks at the carbon intensity of a material being made, but the how it affects water, how it affects land, human health. There's all these additional factors that play into like a life cycle assessment. So when you start doing things like buying building materials and you're interested in how do I get the most, like the lowest impact materials, carbon is one of the things you can look at, but there are several other things, toxicity of the materials that you're using, right, that may not necessarily play into your carbon calculations.
But I will say that like, definitely, and that's really important to take into account. Imagine that we're starting at -100. Okay, right? So in terms of what we've done and where we were at. And so it's like, these are low hanging fruits. And then that's usually what they advise for most municipalities is you gotta start somewhere. And so you start at maybe this base level, and then when you add on all these other things, you see so much more depth and, maybe more staff. There are more of me. We could do a lot more, just saying, but.
This just sounds like one long budget pitch.
I mean, is it not?
Submissions.
What? Add staff. Hi.
You do start to look at like what's de minimis, right? Like what falls below a certain threshold that actually doesn't make sense to start to dive into more and more details on. And I think this shows us that
It's a starting point.
residential, right? That is where we need to dive deeper. We don't need to necessarily dive as deep maybe initially into solid waste facilities because it's such a small piece compared to building and facilities. So I think that's where, like to Laura's point, starting with something really broad and then figuring out where you need to narrow in is really beneficial.
And I will say, similar to like what you're saying about land use and ag and all of that, it's the same with solid waste. Like we are not getting the whole picture right now because we have such a lack of data in this region in terms of any of our waste and where it's going. We like the amount of methane, like your food emits when it's not in compost and it's in the landfill is so much higher than you would think, but it isn't fully captured in this either. So like it's not perfect, right?
I assume that, so you have what's called an inventory management plan, which is where you start to document the assumptions that you've made, the things that you might be missing. And so that's kind of the stuff that Laura's called out, where it's like, I did not look into this. It'd be great for us to look into it in the future, but like right now I don't have the resources and data to do that.
And I documented all of that so that me or anyone else would be able to go in and say, these are the assumptions made, this is how the calculation was made, these are like all of the data points so that we know exactly how we got here, which I think is important, but it still is pretty robust. It's not perfect. It might be more than 5% error. I would need to ask them. I think there is a lot of error also in like people are reporting things, like you're relying on all these other things, right? So it's a starting point. It does still probably paint a pretty accurate picture, but it's not 100%.
Reason I ask that, if we have large error now and then we refine it in the future, we measure it, we don't know if there was a change. That's why I was
Well,
curious.
they actually will know because hopefully we would just have access to the same platform so they can see all of the exact calculations and all the assumptions made and all of the raw data attached to it, like on a centralized platform. So they would be able to kind of tell if we were to fine tune it more, what those other gaps might be.
The greenhouse gas protocol also requires you to go back and redo your baseline if you find certain things that
Yeah.
that are, you're like, wow, we made a huge mistake when we did this. So like you actually go and redo and correct your baseline calculation.
I had a few people that do this as their full-time job really check me and I was like, what did I do? And we, went through a whole quality check that took them like 4 weeks to complete, where they like slogged through all of my data and calculations and they were like, this is exactly, and then every week I would go to them and they'd help me with the calculations. There's a lot of hand holding. I'm very grateful to Igley.
I wasn't questioning your expertise. It was just like you only can analyze the data, the quality of the data.
Right. Our waste data is very terrible, for instance. That's part of the problem, so.
Would you say?
That's trash. And actually, this is reducing local government emissions is actually much more straightforward to me, and things I'm actually already working on. I'm working on a pretty big fleet electrification project. I'm working with our facilities team to show which buildings are our top emitters and where we should actually put that money, what that equivalent is, like this many tons of coal. And so I provided her actually with all that data today so that she can make cases for funding in terms of internally. And then in terms of employee community, I'm actually working with HR to figure out how we can do maybe like an eco pass and make more connectivity for employees, or like, what if there's an opportunity to do e-bikes between the service center and here, and people could take those between the buildings. So that's something I'm talking with both the transportation team about and HR. So I feel like actually and I don't, I want the city to be held accountable and make strides alongside the community, because I think that's really, really important that we lead by example. So I am pushing that a lot as some of like my upfront work now. And these are basically all of the next steps that are recommended. And it sounds essentially, very boilerplate, but it's all true. And I think that the biggest next steps will actually be working with Igley on that climate modeling and wedge analysis. And also I'm doing a climate risk and vulnerability assessment. So I also want to take into account not only mitigation, but adaptation. So this is coming. If we are to have this fire or this flood, what does that look like for our infrastructure? Who is the most vulnerable? How are we figuring out that with emergency management? So I'm going through a cohort with them.
2030 goals always versus your baseline, meaning would it be versus this 2025 baseline?
Wait, what was the first part of that? I'm so sorry.
30 goals, targets, is that versus today?
So that would be saying okay, by 2030, we want to be able to reduce the amount of commercial energy by 10-20% from the baseline that we are at now.
Okay, that's all I had to.
If that makes sense. I don't know if 2030 is really the best target anymore. It's kind of close. It's like scary close, right? I don't know if we want to do 2035, but that's a discussion that we should all have, particularly once we start climate action planning.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, why 2030?
2030 is like the base that all cities were doing probably up until last year. So it's like they haven't updated to say, I probably should have just updated it and assumed 2035. 2050 is the other one. Well, that's what the state of Colorado wants to do. We are not on track for that
Sure.
as a state.
What was the conversation that led to that being the goal as opposed to net negative?
Okay, so technically you wouldn't want, I guess net negative would be very, very, very difficult. I guess that would be essentially like,
We live in tree houses.
Yeah.
it would be a reimagining of our current world, which I'm totally for, but I don't think that's what general society is for. Like that would be like So net zero is saying like, we are not emitting any more than we are consuming. I don't know if that's really realistic either. The state is very much pushing it. I have questions about their implementation and like what legislators put out. It's like on the wish list, it's like exciting, they're putting money towards it and things are happening. It's just, there is this behavior change. So there's actually a behavior change campaign we can do around waste if we want to with CDPHE. That's part of like the STEPS program, figuring out what changes. There's this, I think it's Longmont or it's Lafayette, one of the two is doing it, and I wanna hear how it goes for them, because I think that's a hard sell for the community to say, we're actually gonna analyze your behavior and tell you how to change. That's a tough one. So I wanna see how that marketing goes before I go down that rabbit hole. But it is an interesting one, because it does boil down to, when I look at how we can do this all together, I'm gonna need champions and people alongside me in the community that are like, yeah, I wanna invest in solar, I wanna figure out how to finance this, or I wanna do this micro mobility and hop on my bike instead of driving my car, right? People have to sort of do it alongside you, so that's a little bit with the local government operations. I'm like, I can definitely reduce it at these like, I know I can do that versus like, what can you do versus what can you tell someone else that they should do is kind of the.
Again, I really appreciate your work here. I think it's amazing. I think it's an awesome tool. I think it's an awesome starting point for a lot of interesting conversations. I do feel compelled to say, just because I'm me, you know, even I find this fatiguing, to say that like, at some point, you can't presuppose the systems and values that have led us to this point. Right? At some point, somebody's got to have a conversation about building tree houses. If the point is true sustainability.
I recommend the song for the Wild Bill. It's a great book. But it's a reimagining of our world. But
I don't want to be so quick to sideline the values
What
conversation.
is the slide on the priorities for, like, not the government, more the.
these, I think we need to fine tune a lot more. These are like cookie cutter ones that Ickley was like, these are what we recommend based on your inventory. And I kind of picked and chose, you know, a couple. And while the community ones are, as I said, just more daunting because you're relying on other people caring and other people wanting to do this together. And I think there's a lot of public outreach and communication and a lot of like explaining the why, like, why is this important? Like, why do we want Littleton to be a tourist destination and we want it to look the same in 20 years? Then we need to think about this. We need to figure out how our entire river isn't trash, right? Like, we have to think about some of these things, but it's hard to paint that picture. Because it's just a slow burn.
Well, what I wanted to say is to relate to what you're talking about, Scott, is like, yeah, I don't know, now looking at these, it's a little bit, I don't know, but one is like incentivizing energy efficiency, like that can be, there can be a policy element to that, there can
Lots
be
of
a
house
public-
codes.
There can be a public communication element to that, so that's not like,
I think there will,
you know,
I think that is something that we're gonna do with the Denver Regional Council of Governments, Dr. Cog money. Cause we get a certain allocation and I've been working, Steve a little bit on figuring out exactly that. How can we figure out our building codes and like make it so, like, if we have an incentive program, is it attractive? Is it like actually good for developers? Like, how does that look and what does that look like? And I think we need to do a really big audit of our building codes, land use codes to really understand the best way for that intervention.
Great, so the point that I was making was, you know, there are multiple ways that you can address these different, so you can use this data to help prioritize what you address. But then the way in which you address it, I think I think that's what you're talking about, right? It's like, this can help us prioritize areas of high emissions that need to be looked at first. But the way that you do that, like, so if you look at electric vehicles, for example, that may seem like on paper a quick answer, but this life cycle assessment thing could tell you if that is the right thing to pursue, or if it's more bike lanes or, you know, bike racks or trees on above the sidewalks to make it shady or something. So I think that we can use this to prioritize what we want to address, and then think really critically about what we recommend as the set of solutions in terms of not only reducing carbon, but also maybe potential co-benefits or potential unintended consequences I don't know if that gets at what you're talking about, Scott, but that's how I think about it. It's like, what does it look like for Littleton? Because probably every municipality has a similar list, don't you think? Like, so maybe for Littleton, there's like a more appropriate and relevant like set of solutions that
And I
are
think-
not just about cutting that top line emissions number, but that our culture and what we want our city.
And I think that's what the climate action plan also, I want a really big community engagement element, but I also wanna make sure there's a balance between what people think is the best thing and what also some of this data does say. Because I think it is important to make data-driven decisions to an extent. As all of us are saying, right? It's not perfect. There are other solutions too. I don't necessarily think that, I think that there comes like a public education and a give and take with people of understanding what those interventions are and what that looks like.
I agree with everything everyone's saying, and I think Andrew, that is part of it. I would just, suppose I would just add, completely unrealistically, and then I will stop. Part of my master's thesis was on the sort of advocacy and philosophical shortcomings of gradualism, which is a constant feature of progressive politics. We've been hearing from the Conference of the Parties for like my entire life. That window's closing, 1.5, but there's still time, so make it 2030, make it 2050, and I have just become increasingly untrusting of those types of goals. The time to do this is now, so things like 2030 goals, 2050 goals, sure, that's the realm of what's realistic. I think it's an interesting exercise, interpersonal exercise, values exercise in practical living to look beyond the systems of thinking and the patterns of life that have led us to the point where we don't think that we can presuppose all the values and all the ways of doing things that have got us to we are not consuming our way out of climate change. It is not happening, and I think that a lot of that is kind of assumed in some of these advocacy models, as useful as they are, as necessary as they are to do something realistic.
You're right. I mean, I have no good answer to it. I think that's sort of also where adaptation comes into play and thinking about, well, this is here. Like, we're here. We're at that point. So how, as we as a society are going to adapt to what we know these risks are going to be, and how can we do it in a way that's potentially not as bad as how we've done it in the past? And so I think that's part of it. Like, how can we make our buildings more resilient to fire, to the risk that we see here in Colorado? How can we combat the fact that we are sinking right now in the Denver metro area? You can use it with compost. That actually adds a lot more water to your base, and that can help with groundwater extraction and not the compacting of the soil from cities and big buildings. These things there's a lot of different things that we need to do. It's not just one.
I'm gonna talk to Scott about, I don't know, consuming more each and every year. I've talked to a lot of people about these type of things. And one thing, most people listen to is, let's say, this is a way you can save money and you don't want to be wasteful. And they seem to listen to that. So a lot of this, if we can package it in that way, you're saving money, you're not wasting, we get a lot of action out of that.
Are you presenting this to the Transportation Committee by any chance?
I do not have any plans to.
I'm just wondering, because it talks about bike lanes, and I feel like, isn't there a transportation master plan happening right now? Or is that done?
It's just already and it's talking about being postponed.
Okay. It seems to me that that's maybe falls into their purview.
I think there could also be an opportunity for us to get together between the two boards, regardless of their timeline, and making sure that that I'm working with the transportation team. So I've been talking to them about this. I'm like, I'm gonna give you all of my data, and I want to figure out how, depending on their planning process, just take that out of the equation. Regardless, they are all experts in what they do, and so I want their opinions and I want their help in making this doable. I think transportation has become a hot topic here, as many of you probably already know, and so I think figuring out what makes sense for community members, and if people are gonna use protected bike lanes, are those gonna be utilized, and Are there ways to connect different things?
I'll use them.
Okay, perfect. That's all that matters. Andrew will use them.
Note on that too, I mean, to your point, it does all very much connect together, and even on our Denver Regional Council of Governments meeting that was this afternoon, when they were considering revisions to the 2050 Regional Transportation Master Planning document, master plan, which includes very significant climate reduction targets and VMT targets and reduction targets, or at least mitigation. It was actually really interesting hearing the transportation planners talk about how essential the both transit oriented and complete streets type projects now are for our region, almost even exceeding the land use planning at a certain point, because we are not necessarily seeing the benefits of densified land use planning in a residential and commercial sector. Because we do not have the complete streets and transit-oriented facilities that would enable us to actually meet those longer-term targets too.
Supporting infrastructure is not there.
Yeah, the supporting infrastructure is not there, the incentives aren't there, quite frankly, some of the funding isn't there. And I think so when we're even talking about doing complete streets in our own right what's up?
What does complete streets mean?
Essentially, safe, buffered, larger sidewalks, safer crossings, bike lanes that may be segregated from fast-moving traffic, things that I think our community has been really asking for, not for just safety and well-being and quality of life. It does fit into these larger climate action models, I'm happy to see that we're really taking a stab at it now.
And part of it is encourage different types of modes of travel, right? So you'll have like a really big separate bike lane that people can use, and that way it encourages them not to actually use their car.
Okay, that makes sense.
I just I don't know how much more questions you want to take on this, but I also want to say, while we were all looking at the numbers and looking at decimal places, I just want to acknowledge how much work went into this and how fantastic it is to have a starting point from which to base some of these decisions on in the future. So thank you.
Thanks.
For us as local government leaders, we also didn't have environmental factors by which to base or weigh prioritizations and decisions. And looking at things like, our building emissions, it is just another beyond the financial, beyond the taking the non-waste and taking community and having civic pride. There is an environmental argument to be made for some of the actions that we are thinking about taking. And so I hope we can use this tool, not necessarily because, quite frankly, we are a group of passionate, involved, and caring people, but we are outliers, quite frankly, in terms of a general population. And so we need to be able to have these kinds of data and this kind of data, these kinds of plans to be amongst other arguments in favor of taking these actions, amongst those financial arguments, amongst the staffing and operational arguments and quality of life arguments. So I'm psyched that we can actually add, that to kind of our arsenal.
And I mean, it all getting back to if you follow the money, even if you don't care at all about the environment, all you care is your pocketbook. And think about the fact of each energy bill of each city building and how we can reduce that over time and potentially reduce any burden on taxpayers or keep it the same and put that in some type of fund for more electrification, for figuring out how to make it even better, right? So there are really creative ways to think about it, or people that, you can have certain different incentives where it's less of the stick and more of the carrot for some of these things too. But there is basically the buildings that emit the most have the highest bill.
Yeah.
By a lot. And that's usually by and large true for residential too. If your bill is higher, you're probably emitting more. You're probably using that electricity during peak hours, overwhelming the grid, overwhelming the system, drawing even more energy. And so that's why they have off-peak, mid-peak, on-peak hours for different energy companies, is because of the infrastructure in and of itself. So you may already know, everyone may already know this, but it's it's interesting. And there is kind of always a monetary argument that can go along with this. Sometimes it's the upfront investment that scares a lot of people, but you have to look at the savings over time. And so it's like, what is the savings gonna be if we electrify this, even this one piece, or if we move the building so that we're not having the sun shine into all these windows and have to crank the AC, like crazy things like that, where maybe it's just the orientation of how these are and where the windows are, the amount of insulation, right? So thinking more about, are there passive house standards that we as a government can look at for our own buildings that could be models for people that wanna do it for their own homes? Like I think there are exciting things that we can sort of piece together with all of this, so.
I would bet that in pretty short order here, maybe even tomorrow, that communities are gonna have a need to discuss missing middle electrification and apply their creativity to that, because the wealthy can afford solar panels and so on, and increasingly limited incentive money for electrification will likely go to people who can afford it. You're gonna have a huge segment right in the middle who's gonna say, well, I'm pull solar and heat pumps and
Yeah.
like electrified yard equipment and so on.
Right. I fully agree. So, if y'all are ready, I can move on to waste.
Can I ask, there's,
I have another presentation that's about 30 slides.
that's great.
Are you excited?
On this one, like, just zoom out a little bit, like big picture, like what happens next on this greenhouse gas inventory? And then like, to something Pam said earlier, like at some point priorities have to make it into like a budget process, like decision-making process. So like just big picture, like what are the top level steps that gets us from this to having some like resources allocated to whatever plan comes out of this? I'm just thinking like, how does government work here?
Well, I'm not gonna explain how government works, because I'm almost at the end and I'm still figuring it out. No, I mean, in terms of priorities, so council's on break right now, we're coming back on the 15th, and then election in November. Between now and then, actually, quite frankly, solid waste management is going to be coming up as a pretty significant topic. This is a ball that needs to get rolling slowly, very cautiously over a long period of time, but it needs to start rolling soon. And I'm excited to miss out on your PowerPoint, but I will.
Get it
I'm
again
excited
by
to
the-
see your PowerPoint at a later date. To hear your all's input on that. And that is something where there will be state funding as well as some other grant programs that Laura and I were talking about that we can put time, effort, and monetary power behind to start that process, because I think it is pretty critically important. The buildings and facilities, Julia's right now finishing up with her
Where all the numbers stay for a carbon footprint score.
extraordinarily scary building assessment, but quite frankly, much like so many other aspects of our city, our stormwater assets, our streets, things of that nature, we need to start the planning process now over the next couple of decades as to which buildings are the highest priorities and in what order do we replace them, because at a certain point they will soon become dysfunctional or too costly to essentially keep on our tab.
I suppose what I would add is, so, we as a board and city council and city staff have sort of a narrow piece of this that they can address. I think to a large extent, which is stuff that is controlled by the city, fleet electrification, because that's in the control of the city. A lot of a greenhouse gas inventory, as Laura's been talking about, is community-wide. And I think we just have to know that we're gonna have some advocacy tools. We've talked as a board about public education and so on, but also limited tools. And so I think we would have to start from what can the city do? We're doing a lot of it already, but it's gonna mean sort of an explicit statement of political will from the council that we want to hit whatever reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by whatever year. And then start identifying, how we do that and making financial commitments to do it. And being mindful, I would say always, to the potential of the council's political makeup to change as that is happening, including potentially, November. We don't know who's gonna get elected and what their appetite will be for some of this stuff. And I suppose within that, you also, do we prioritize that effort of getting the greenhouse gas inventory in front of council and asking for reduction targets and asking for those types of commitments, or do we focus instead on things like, waste diversion and so on? So, how do we, I think we are, part of the answer to the question, Andrew, is we are positioned as a board, we shape that. And, how do we spend our time and
I wanna bring an RFP to the board, hopefully either next month or the month after, for the climate action plan and really get input on it. I really would love to make it equity centered, but I need resident support, just in terms of the current political climate, if we wanna go that direction. And so that will also be a critical piece of like, how are we getting that missing middle? Is that something that Littleton cares about? Or is that something we're gonna decide that we're gonna push forward? How will that play out politically? We'll have to see, but I think we can still, do what we can on our end to fold in not only this data, but also the community engagement side, as well as the side of like, yeah, let's look at it from that lens. Like, how are we bringing people along in a way that they can participate?
And right at this moment, they can celebrate and more things. So I hope I'm not getting it. I'm sorry.
I'm fine.
One of the top 10 action items we developed was just the fact of a greenhouse gas inventory in that area.
Yeah, y'all got us here. Alright.
Well, I'm gonna take off, but Andrew, if you wanna have further conversations on how that turns into action from a local governance level, I can at least give you maybe some insight or thoughts, at least I have in my head. Scott's hopeless, so no.
We actually are in the budgeting process for 2026 right now.
Oh, really?
I'm trying to do what I can.
Yeah.
So that's good
Yes.
information. So what that means really is
I've come up
that,
with a whole like wish list of
Yes.
everything I want.
right, yeah, so but whatever happens in this climate action plan really isn't gonna hit budget discussions until next year's budget.
If not the next year.
If not the next year. So that's why you're so focused on this, is because this is what.
What
is
can we do
getting
now?
Budgeted right now.
Yeah, what can we do in the meantime? So that's yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to get a sense of, like, where should we like focus our attention or energy, et cetera. So-
I would love a letter of support from y'all if you like this plan. So we'll see.
It helps me making my arguments that much stronger when going to council, especially when it comes to also even extending beyond council to talk about regional conversations as well.
Yeah.
That kind of advocacy does sway the opinions of other council members.
They really want ESB's voice when this plan goes up. And so I want to present it, and then we might not have time tonight to talk about what that letter looks like. So we can talk about it.
Yeah, smiley face.
That was great for it.
Sort of between the two, so. And do you want me to wait? No, you're good. So, as many of you already know, we started this plan in February of 2024 before I started. So Brent actually kicked it off and had conversations with Centennial, Inglewood, and Sheridan about how we could do a combined South Metro regional plan around waste. So this was really just doing an audit of where we were as a region, where we are as a city, where are these different levers? What is in our trash? What does that look like? So I presented a little bit of this to you after the waste summit about, or at least some of you, about exactly what is in the trash, what did council have to say about it, what was the community engagement and some of that baseline hauler engagement. But this goes a little bit deeper, and it's through Colorado Circular Communities, or C3 enterprise, which is through the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, CDPHE. So you might see those acronyms and you can always say, what is that again? And happy to probably read it off this sheet because that's how we are, but it's called the STEPS program, strategic technical expertise for the public sector, and the state really appreciates when you use all of those words. So here we are. And all right. So this is the plan area. And just wanted to, yeah, make sure y'all could see exactly what that geography looks like. I'm sure a lot of us already know it in our heads, but this is what we're calling the South Metro region based on the 4 cities' jurisdictional boundaries. So we're gonna go over how the plan was developed, a little bit about that waste composition and generation, as well as the specific regional actions that were identified as the group, and then diving into the city of Littleton specific actions. So this plan is going to study session and will be presented by the consultant to council. And will go in front of council for adoption on August 19th. And so, yeah, that's kind of the timeline for this, with hopeful implementation probably January 2026 after November. So this was the overall mission. They found through community engagement, and I can show all the survey numbers, that Littleton residents agree or strongly agree that they support efforts to increase recycling and composting. And so we have an favoring equitable waste reduction and waste diversion strategy. So when I say waste diversion, just so we're all on the same page, it's instead of putting everything in the landfill, how can we divert it to a hazardous waste facility that can repurpose it or dispose of it safely? How can we recycle and reuse those materials? How can we incentivize construction, and instead of demolition, maybe it's deconstruction, and have some type of reclaimed lumber policy, which is actually being driven potentially at the state level too. There's a battery stewardship bill that was passed this year, which is exciting. So all of these things, I think about metals and how we are actually thinking about the full circularity of products that are in the system. So the plan development process has definitely been a long journey to get here. So it's been about 1.5 years. And starting with like a baseline assessment and that generation and modeling, and then putting in all of the community engagement. So the engagement process reached over 43,500 community interactions. You can see sort of the breakdown of industry stakeholders, including 7 local hauler interviews, which I believe are over an hour each. As well as all the surveys sent out and the number of responses. We had 34 participants at the Waste Summit. So based on schedules and availability, that was Mayor Schlachter, Councilmember Reichart, and Mayor Pro Tem Barr were able to attend. So they have a little bit of that priming already, as well as representatives from Englewood, Sheridan, and Centennial were there. And then at one of the meetings, one of the Arapahoe County Commissioners was there. There are different types of focus groups. So that was from businesses, multifamily, and disadvantaged communities. We have a resident champion training that's both online, and there's a specific South Metro website that houses every single piece and breakdown of this data. I have flyers I've been giving out at Meet, Greet, and Eats. I'm hoping people are excited and want to talk about it more, but that's kind of where we're at here. This is just to go over what exactly was in trash. So our current diversion rate is 15%, which is the same as the state of Colorado, which is 42 out of 50 in the United States of states that divert their waste. So Colorado is doing very terribly at this, which is why there's so much different funding and targets that the state is trying to get to, because they're well aware there's a problem. This projected total waste generation would say if we had business as usual between now and 2035, we would have an additional 260,000 tons of waste. So that is equivalent to 430 Empire State Buildings worth of trash by volume. Or you could also think about it as the equivalent of 540,000 metric tons of carbon, which is also equivalent to driving over 120,000 gasoline-powered cars for a year. So that is kind of what that impact is overall looking at, or you could also look at it as 61 football fields that are 10 feet deep. So I don't know if any of that, I think it's helpful for a frame of reference because it's hard to imagine what 260,000 tons is. So without any changes, 85% of our waste will continue to be landfilled. And we're trying to see how we can not do that. So,
That's 260,000 tons per year by 20.
I believe that's total. Like between, the 10 years, between now and 2035. So they found, through digging through our trash, that approximately, based on all of their modeling, that like 78% of our waste is actually recoverable or potentially recoverable through different interventions. So you can see from this chart how much is probably not, potentially recoverable, not at all. What's recoverable in the current programs or what could easily be recoverable in potential programs that we could think about. So that might be yard waste, organics, cardboard, glass, metal, lumber, right? Those are all different things. So when they dug through our trash, there was a lot more that could have been diverted. That was
You
that.
know how they defined recoverable versus potentially recoverable?
Yeah, I can dig it out of the 100-page report, isn't it you? Like, I'm serious, I will.
Yeah.
I'll send all of you the report plan once it's finalized and it will be posted on the website too eventually.
Potentially recoverable is like such a large percentage of that, and so I'm so curious what like that.
What they categorize.
Yeah, what does that capture versus
Yeah.
the recoverable?
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
Yeah, this also tells us, so what I understand from this chart is 25% of waste is either recoverable or potentially recoverable in our current program. On the previous slide, you said that right now we're recovering 15%, so we're actually doing pretty good.
No, wait, what?
No, we're doing really well based on the potential, because the ceiling right now is 25%.
No, this is additionally,
15.
so if you add 15 plus 22,
Oh, this is in
addition.
in addition to what's.
This is like what was landfill that they dug through.
Yeah.
This is just from.
No, we're actually failing. We're doing really terribly. I can show you letter grades and everything, and I can show you those, and they're
It's not to start.
not fun.
No, I just misinterpreted. what-
No, I
Yeah.
liked the optimism, but no, we're not doing well. I really appreciated the optimism.
You notice the statistic previously, because it was
Yeah.
like in that 15%, if you break it down by type of recoverable waste, like only like 1% of plastics, actually. Yeah. So pretty useful as far as that goes.
You mean in terms of like,
Well, 15%, it's like glass is, recovered glass is pretty high.
oh, you mean of the materials themselves?
There's plastics.
Plastic is always gonna be low, which is why we should incentivize not using plastic. Honestly. How can we use cans? How can we use glass? How can we bring our own bottles, right? Preaching to the choir of this group, but
I apologize if I missed that when I stepped out, but for the waste they went through, was it residential, commercial? I know, I guess we don't have any industrial technically, right? But like, it included all of
it
those.
is them sorting through your trash. It is 10,175 pounds of trash and recycling sorted. And it did include commercial as well as residential waste. So this is what's in residential trash and where those levers are. And then this is commercial. So recyclables is a bigger opportunity for commercial and all of the other things like paper, metal, glass. Whereas residential organics was so huge, and that
It's 40.
yeah. So that means 48% of what was in the trash organic could have been.
Oh, didn't we talk about this last time? Like, what time of year was this done?
So they did it during a like like it was during the fall.
Yeah, so that's probably what contributes to some extent, yeah, is yard waste being.
For sure.
Okay.
And they note that in the study, but I still think there's a pretty big intervention for.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, even if you reduce that by 10%, right, you still got 38%.
That could relate to our greenhouse gas, which is also.
Right, sorry, I really skipped around, I hope I didn't give anyone.
Sorry for.
That's all good. So these are the regional strategies that that we agreed upon between all 4 cities that we want to implement and explore. It shows on the right the amount of tons diverted and the additional diversion rate. So the more little recycling symbols, the more impact it has. And then you can see the monetary side of it, of the amount that it will cost. That's not That's the amount that it would cost to do things. And then there's an implementation timeline that they came up with too. The first one being the regional recycling drop-off centers. And so it's best practice with populations over 100,000. So when they looked at us as a region, to establish drop-off centers for 50,000 residents. So that means between all 4 cities, which is around 190, they recommend 4 additional drop-off centers. This is people that often don't have access to recycling and have been craving places to actually go and drop that off, right? Where would that look like? How would that look? So, that is one intervention that was recommended. So like even in areas that have like services, recycling centers can help support like additional surges in that recyclable material. So people moving in or out, it provides overflow options for haulers and residents and the ability to add additional materials. Like, yeah, you move in, you got 50 boxes, you're like, this isn't gonna fit in stuff it in my multifamily trash. Like where else can it go? Right, so that's kind of also that side of it, or there's a huge event that's being thrown and
Littleton doesn't currently have any recycling drop-off centers, okay, that's what I thought.
we have none. The next one is improving organic diversion access and supporting large-scale organics processing infrastructure that accepts food scraps and other compostables. And there's a little bit more context to this, so A1 Organics, which is in Sheridan, currently is expanding their yard waste component, but they have the ability, if we wanted to partner with them as a region, to figure out how to help them put in the food waste component to accept more, because there is a little bit of that lack of infrastructure. And if you think about, well, I've composted. Where is the composting facility? How far is my compost going? Sheridan really isn't that far. So it actually is a pretty cool opportunity to potentially partner with them and help them with some type of application for the state funds or what that might look like to expand those operations.
Laura, I've thought about this because I don't compost and I kind of feel a little guilty about it. But I wonder if I put all my organics that I can down my garbage disposal, and it goes to the,
Don't do it.
We'll get a water guy here.
Yeah, we can do a tour of the wastewater treatment plant and they will love to tell you why you should never do that.
It just adds more load to the wastewater plant, so it's harder to treat it.
It has more,
It's
then it takes more energy and more chemicals in order to treat it and break it down.
so that's not, even if they expand it, wouldn't this be as efficient as this? Is it-
No, you don't wanna put no, because, okay, so when you have compost and it breaks down and becomes dirt, you can reuse that dirt. It takes a lot, it like embodies a lot more nutrients and carbon to make like really cool agricultural developments, really cool urban gardens, community gardens, all of that. It also retains a lot more water versus when you put it down your disposal, someone's using chemicals to treat it.
Because like in Portland, I was there for a summer and my guy knew anyway, he brought truckfuls of the stuff he got from the sewage treatment plant.
Yes, and that's fine, but it took a lot of energy to make it.
Too much
Compost, just.
Toss it in the pile.
So what, it was compost generated by the sewer plant?
Yeah, it's the greatest garden I've
Solid.
It's dangerous and has.
So we actually take our sludge to a farm out in eastern Colorado, spread it out there. To get it to the next level where you could actually sell it as compost, there's a whole nother step of.
Then you gotta transport it there.
You have to, I think there's a sterilization process and stuff you have to go through.
So it's just not energy efficient to do it.
It's not as efficient for
No.
us.
Or are these recommendations in order of priority?
So the ones for the city are not, the ones for the region, they have not fully finalized that, and if they feel like it's a priority, I think that this one is a much higher diversion impact than the first one. So it also just kind of depends as well on if the state does an organics ban landfills, which they're considering.
Part of the conversation about recommendations, considering willingness to drive to drop-off centers?
Well, but they wouldn't, if we were to implement based on our strategies, I want people to be able to opt in to curbside. I mean,
And this would be more of like an additional option
This-
to curbside?
no, it's residents wouldn't go here to drop anything off. That's like, it's like your like scraps, your Compost Colorado, your Wampost.
They're dropping off.
And Waste Management and Republic also have services. They go and they drop it off as the hauler. I mean, there are drop-off sites you could do through, like directly through Scraps in Compost Colorado, where you like take it to Dirt Coffee and you like pay into that subscription and you drop it off.
We're actually now a drop-off spot as well for Compost Colorado for Breckenridge Brewery.
Amazing. There you go. So there are those options, but that's not really what this is saying. This is saying increasing the capacity to process it and like where it's gonna go and how far it has to travel. So it would be much more beneficial for South Metro to have this hub.
So we'd have to do both, the increased capacity
Yes.
and do the household level intervention.
Yeah, I'll get to the household with our citywide strategies, but the regional ones are much broader.
Does it come back to the person putting it on the curb? I'd love to see that.
Oh, you mean in terms of finished compost? That
Yeah,
depends.
Denver does something, right?
You can purchase some of your finished compost, yeah. I mean, I would assume that that would probably be, I don't know if like the systems are sophisticated enough that someone would come to your house and drop off your finished compost.
Well, but then you just have the option.
Or if you would go pick it up somewhere, like that would, I know that there are cities that do that, but I'm hopeful that maybe we could do that, but I don't know if that's, happening in the next like 5 years.
In fact, I'm not sure if that's not what Portland was doing, because they pick up the compost in Portland. So we might have been getting that back from like the garden I was talking about. So it could have been
Do you know how likely it is that the state would ban organics from landfills?
I don't know yet. They haven't made that policy decision. They're still talking to legislators. They're not certain. It's wanted by the recycling community.
Sure.
You know,
I feel like you can't do it without the infrastructure associated with like allowing people to.
Right, we have to look at-
Easily.
right, we kind of have to look at both of these things, right? So this next one is supporting multifamily and commercial recycling and composting. This is overall a little bit more tricky, and to define it a little better, see, the definition of a employer firm is a business entity that has at least one paid employee in addition to the business owner. I did not know, and did look that up. So that's that definition. I'm gonna talk to our housing person about that percentage of housing. I'm not 100% sure if that is the exact number. However, you can,
It's the number of structures, so there's.
I think it is the number of structures. You did. So this is basically requiring either by ordinance or encouraging property managers to submit some type of implementation plan. So that could be offering also like some of the technical assistance that Aiden provides with the Green Business Program through the state in terms of helping commercial entities. And then multifamily becomes a really fun conversation because there is a specific law around any multifamily unit that is 8+ is considered a commercial entity. And therefore they can opt out of any type of organized city contract, but they can also opt in. So there are ways to work with people, but if you're like, even if you're a single family home as part of an HOA, you could be, so where the conversation for it is a little bit nuanced for the state. And so part of it is really thinking about how we're bringing these communities along and encouraging them to be a part of it with the rest of the city. These are Littleton specific strategies, which I'm pretty excited about them. I'm gonna dive into each one a little bit more specifically. So implementing yard debris curbside pickup for single family. Yard debris is about 20% of single family waste streams, which they think is about 3,000 tons per year by 2035. And we're capturing less than 1% of that. So A1 Organics in Sheridan currently accepts yard waste, so it doesn't go very far. It should be pretty easy to add in. And then you would potentially add in a third curbside bin for organics, just to help reduce landfill waste and support composting as a whole. And it's not really needed for most multifamily, and we wouldn't start there. Mostly because the yard space is very different when you look at a single family versus multifamily, and then you're dealing with either a property management company versus when you start with single family, you can really target contamination. So you can put things like an oops tag on there, like, oops, you accidentally put this thing that's actually not compostable. We dug it out for you. Next time, please don't do that. It's a lot harder when you look at commercial and multifamily. So that's also true for, again, organics. So for multifamily and commercial, this would have to be a phased approach based on Colorado laws, and also sort of, as I was just saying, like starting with community education at the level of like, we can identify exactly the contamination issue. We all make mistakes, right? But by 2035, City of Littleton's single family sector will generate roughly 2,900 tons of food scraps and other compostables per year, or roughly 20% of its total generated waste. And so a dedicated curbside service for food scraps can significantly divert the amount of landfill bound material, and it does contribute directly to environmental benefits. A lot of that we've talked about with composting, but when you put organics into the landfill, it breaks down and it emits more methane. And as we saw, methane has a higher global warming potential, which causes all the other fun things. So it could be a really good impact for us to look at. Well, now we're going to talk about some fun laws. So Colorado's Producer Responsibility Program, or Extended Producer Responsibility EPR law, is supposed to start in 2026. And so the idea is that it requires companies that sell products in packaging and paper products to fund a statewide recycling system to recycle those materials and recover them. So there is a producer responsibility organization called Circular Action Alliance, where they are working on that reimbursement of drop-off and curbside collection costs, such as capital costs, education, outreach, operational, profit margin, and eligible administrative expenses. And the draft plan is currently under review, the Colorado Circular Action Alliance plan. But continuing to monitor and stay engaged for those funding opportunities, because it's gonna be, the idea is that it's free for all Coloradans to recycle, hoping by 2030, but the phased approach starts in 2026. We can set ourselves up well so that people in our community have that access, know those guidelines, and are actively participating. So that leads us to this, it's leveraging the actual law. So if we set ourselves up for success with something like an equal space ordinance, which I'll get into in a minute, hauler licensing, pay as you throw, which is currently what Sheridan has, and they pay a lot less than the average Littleton resident. So that's a volume-based pricing, or an organized hauling contract, also known as single hauler. Those all set you up a lot better for success, whereas Circular Action Alliance, currently Littleton, they're not even gonna touch our reimbursement for multiple more years because it's so much more complicated based on the open market system. So figuring out even how to license and knowing who's operating, if they can't separate the amount of recyclables that is and the cost of that, they're not gonna do the reimbursement very quickly.
So if we went single hauler,
That would be the best.
then we would get reimbursed for recycling.
Yes, much quicker than every other, because it's much easier. You know exactly that it's this one entity, right? It's a much easier system. And then, so another good leverage point is requiring hauler licensing, requiring haulers to track and report tonnage data, which helps things like greenhouse gas inventories, because we can actually have accurate data about exactly what that looks like, where it's going, what's being diverted. So ordinances, there's some examples on here, and I'll also send out these slides if you want to dig into them. Boulder, Denver, Lafayette, Vail, Broomfield have all passed this. And it's basically like, you know who's operating in your city. You could put on the website, hey, we have these 6 haulers that are licensed. Pick one of the 6. Right now, our guidance on the website is please coordinate with your neighbors. Here's the noise ordinance. That's it. So this hones in on sort of if we were needing politically to go to a phased approach, this is a good potential first step. But I'll explain a little bit more. Another is an equal space ordinance. So thinking about the multifamily and commercial sectors, it requires the same amount of physical space for a trash bin as a recycling bin, ensuring that developments have to put this into their plans, right? That's a lot of issues with a lot of the small businesses in Littleton, is they're like, we don't even know where we would put a giant recycling like shared bin because we don't even have the space, but what if we actually put that in the code and future developments were able to think about it and had to account for it? It's a really good intervention for commercial and multifamily in that sense, because it has to be part of their plan. If it goes into ordinance, so Superior, Broomfield, Boulder, Fort Collins all have similar ones, which are broken down too. So this is support the transition to organized collection, also known as single hauler. So this is when a municipality contracts with a hauler, or it can be haulers, for curbside trash and recycling services, often including mandatory recycling or pay-as-you-throw pricing, and optional services like composting or bulky item pickup. It can look a lot of different ways. Different cities have done it differently. We will see like sort of what the community is thinking as well, and what political will is, but this is one of the best things to lower all of your prices, to reduce truck traffic, improve safety, reduce wear and tear. So if you have 14 plus haulers and they're going over the streets over and over on routes in an inefficient way, you're paying for that infrastructure in your taxes, because they're gonna tear up the roads with these huge trucks much quicker. And also imagine, hey, everyone in the city takes out their trash on Tuesdays. I saw that my neighbor had their trash out. That's a reminder for me, rather than all of this other noise. And then you can also have universal guidelines as a city. Wouldn't it be cool to like all have the same recycling and composting guidelines? Like very, novel, all of that. The other thing is safety. Like people don't really want these trash trucks like by their homes all the time with their kids playing in yards. Also like more pollutants that like are directly visible in the community from these huge trucks. And then also like the smell and the noise. It's like not that cute to have a truck come down your street 6 different times during the week. That's like all these different companies, right? And then I will note that City of Sheridan, you can see, pays $11 to $20 a month on average, whereas Littleton pays $21 to $30, and they have volume-based pricing, so that's pay as you throw. It's still not quite as robust, I don't think, as organized collection, but it's like very, very close. And so basically in every single city, there is shown data that like if one of you uses waste management and your neighbor also uses waste management, you could be paying up to like $50 difference a month depending on your negotiation skills. And that's like literally part of a process you would have to know, and you'd have to be able to go through that and have the time for it. And it's kind of wild if you think about it that way. Like everyone, there should be that transparency, but they do not have to provide it because there is no accountability. And so Sheridan, Fort Collins, Denver, Boulder, Morrison, Broomfield have all done this transition. We'll just have to see what the political tides show, but this is one of the strongest ways to increase our diversion and lower the costs for everyone. So that's a big one. The next thing is ongoing community group outreach and engagement. So according to Littleton residents, some of the biggest barriers are low trust that recycling is being recycled. So exactly what we were saying before, like, is our plastic actually being recycled? Someone put an air tag on it. It's in a sea next to China. Like there's all those like news reports and all of this other stuff. The other one is, well, we don't know what to recycle. So the low trust side of things, if we think about it, glass, aluminum, cardboard, paper, those are all actually have pretty high recycling rates. So is there a way to teach people about how to get those out of the system and move away from plastic as much as they can? Producers at the same time are also being incentivized to move away from that based on, I think the harder it is for the state to divert, so the more different amount of materials you use. So like you rip off a plastic sheet and then it has a cardboard thing, but that has a wax coating on your like microwave meal, whatever it is. The more different components and the harder it is for that package to be recycled, the more companies will have to pay. So that's like a whole other side of it that Hannah probably knows a little bit more about than I do. Exactly. So it's also businesses over 5 million, I believe, in profit, right?
5.5 million in revenue.
You said 5.5?
5.5 million in revenue.
Okay, in revenue. So it's not gonna hit the really little guys, I think is the idea. But it does hit things like
Like a minimum weight that you put out into to the state. Like even if you're over 5.5 million in revenue, but you only put out 5,000 pounds of single-use materials, you'd be exempt.
Okay. That's cool. I didn't know that. That makes sense though. And then other things are like website updates, distributing different types of guidelines, training staff, figuring this out for community events, and also like tabling, answering questions, being there. So really trying to do that. I'll be at the next meet in July as well to talk to people. There is a self-selection of people that want to talk to me that probably already support it. I did notice that. However, maybe there's people that y'all know that you're friends with that might be interested to know that like this is actually a lot cheaper and probably easier for them, right? You would have a dedicated representative potentially if we were to do single hauler that you could call for customer support, right? You wouldn't have like this whole runaround of things, and then you'd also have access to free recycling much quicker. The next is exploring adopting a universal recycling ordinance. It's requiring businesses and multifamily buildings to provide recycling access. And so that would have to follow outreach, awareness, support. You probably need to look at pilot programs and some type of assistance, and it would go and complement really well with our equal space ordinance. And so some communities that have done this, Longmont, Boulder, Avon, Vail, Austin, Texas. I know Longmont is kind of sort of in the thick of that, and I think it's not as hard as it sounds, particularly because it should technically, even though a lot of them are paying into it potentially as businesses, it should be considered like somewhat free, and with all of the other state assistance, I think there is a path to it. And so I'll be curious to follow how these other cities are doing it and working it. So this one is more of an exploration and figuring out what that would look like for here.
I got slightly confused, excuse me, I do this a lot, but, so you, Littleton, you have to recycle?
No.
Oh. Where I am, we always recycle, so.
We really don't have any requirements.
We have no requirement,
Wow.
unless you break the noise ordinance.
How does that work?
I think it's basically telling haulers they can't drive the truck at 2 AM.
Oh, basically.
Yeah, that's basically it. Well, sure.
Yeah, we won't.
I mean, we won't get rid of that, I'll say, hopefully. I hope there could be, a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, this last one, I know we've gone through a lot, is establishing a construction and demolition ordinance. And so that requires contractors to sort materials like wood, metal, cardboard. And so then you can think about this transition from demolition to deconstruction. So thinking about like, I'm part of a work group that's considering proposing to the state a reclaimed lumber policy. And so you as a homeowner, you have something wood that you're replacing on the side of your facade, right? You actually already own that wood, but if you were to just tear down that part of the structure, that right now they can just toss it and then you buy new wood, and that is what it is. However, they know that wood actually gets stronger over time and is more resilient. And there are ways that this wouldn't even harm lumber companies as much, because you could pay them to reclaim the wood, it would be less, but then we'd be chopping down less trees and reusing materials that are already right there. And so that's something that can just be put into a code that allows people, right now no one's allowed to do that. Like there's no regulations around it. And so this literally just allows people to be able to like reuse shingles and roofs and metals that like you as a homeowner likely, or a business, already own. But a construction company, it makes it a little bit slightly more difficult for them, but Boulder is really leading the way on this. They're one of the national leaders. There's actually a really cool, NPR blast about it that I can send you all if you're interested. And it is exciting because it's sort of bringing along those construction companies with them, because if you think about all of the things that go into a building and all of those materials, where they come from, where a tree grows, how much water it took to cultivate the tree, right? You can really think about how this can work. And I did find out we're allowed to use the Dr. Cobb funds for building decarbonization to include this. So stay tuned. And
Dr. Cobb.
Denver Regional Council of Governments has a building policy collaborative work group that through EPA money that they do have access to, they are doling out to communities based on a very specific formula. And so Littleton has a certain allocation. We apply for it, and as long as we have a strong application and need for those funds over the next 4 years, they dole it out to us each month. in monthly amounts for us to support policy, building codes, and all of those different transitions. So this can be included in that as embodied carbon. Sorry, that was a lot of words. But and then this is just at a high level, looking again at what exactly those strategies are, what that diversion impact is, what you can see the fiscal impact is as well, so. And then what the projected timeline they think is reasonable and feasible for us as a city. So yeah, that was a lot of information. I don't know if y'all have any like questions, concerns, or you feel like other people will have a lot of questions and concerns about, or opposition. I would love to hear it.
If people know they're gonna save money, I think that's huge. That's just huge.
It's not 100% guaranteed, because if you really negotiate with a waste hauler, you could have a really good deal and you might end up paying slightly more. However, I don't think that's true for most people, but we cannot 100% guarantee every single person will save money, because we have no idea what those contracts look like. But I would say majority of people will, is what we can say, but not every person. What if you're just like really good at it, at the negotiating, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think beyond that, then the second thing is just the amount of traffic and how many trucks are on your street and the noise. Cause I
It
think.
could reduce cost though for infrastructure in the
Yeah.
streets, so even if you're
Yeah,
not,
that's a good point.
if you're not getting it in the monthly bill.
I think if people know those two things, hopefully it won't be such a.
And it honestly is kind of the ultimate competition, so people think about it, they're like, oh, we're worried, there's a lack of competition. This RFP process would take over a year. Once we start it, maybe longer, and it is, these companies are gonna go after it. And they work as hard as they can to fit our requirements. They have to showcase what they can do as a business. It kind of is the ultimate market competition in getting an contract with the community. But then you also think about economies of scale. It like works so fundamentally differently for the waste sector, and it seems so counterintuitive. I think on the other side, the only argument that I've heard that I have no idea how to respond to is that it harms people's freedom of choice and they want government to stay out. And that I don't.
Have there been any surveys done lately just to kind of gauge public interest? Cause I do feel like a lot of sentiments around it harkens back to like Scott's time on council, where it was like this really political thing. And so I'm just curious if there's been any public just survey, not even like outreach necessarily, but kind of like gauging.
They did do multiple surveys for this plan. Fall. So like within the past,
Okay.
with like less than 9 months ago.
And what, do you know what it was like for the city of Littleton and in
So-
terms of like single hauler
One
contract?
problem with all surveys is that people self-select of who takes them. So you have to care and want to take it. And so communities that have done these surveys, even if they go out to the community and do all this
And these
engagement.
surveys were all done through this program, not necessarily done by the city of
Right,
Littleton.
exactly.
Right, exactly. They did target specific, like they targeted each community specifically. It wasn't just all of South Metro.
Sure.
And they did do that community engagement. I will say that like the vocal minority that tends to come out are not the people that tend to be the survey takers. So it's really hard for communities to know, like Brighton thought 92% of their community wanted single hauler, and they were not able to pass it because they had this vocal minority not at all captured in any surveys, because those aren't the people that are taking. Which is,
Count on the fact that they will very energetically pursue the goal. Efforts.
yeah, I will say though that this plan specifically in August that we are hoping to just adopt, it doesn't say that we have to do any of this. It doesn't commit us to any specific action, ordinance. It's saying that, yes, you did the study, it is statistically valid. You did all the steps, you went through it with the state. You did all of these different types of engagement. We recognize that, and we are going to explore how to implement each one of these. So it doesn't actually commit the city to anything. There's no financial impact on adopting a plan. There is no commitment. It's just saying like, yeah, good job, plan adopted, we agree. So that I hope makes it less political this year. And whereas we can revisit after the election next year into what does it look like to take ordinances to council? What does it look like to go through an RFP process. But regardless, I'd still love to work with y'all to have a letter of support for the August 19th planned adoption, because I think it's hard. I can scream my heart out at events, and like the people that are listening are the people that already care and know.
How do we get you that?
So
We have 5 minutes, just saying.
yeah, so it can be, I can take a first stab at a draft, and maybe similar to what we did, it was a little painful, but we can do it again. For the South Suburban stuff, we can put on the screen and I'll have y'all edit and add things together.
Awesome.
It's great. So it could just be that I probably will have a draft for y'all to review that I'll send out before the meeting, and would love like your additions, your renditions. I think it might just be easier if I provide with a starting point. But I'm fine if y'all wanna do it from scratch.
No, you can.
Start.
Is there some combination of actions? So these are expressed as like individual actions, and they have like impacts and like implementation timelines, and that to me makes it seem like it's like a menu of things to pick from. Is there like a prioritized list, or is there some combination of actions which would have the highest impact? Which would be paired with like the single hauler thing?
I think that would be
like impactful or
Yeah.
palatable to someone that might not support it.
Yeah, I think there definitely is a way, a path to that. I think in terms of this plan and keeping it more general and not saying that we are prioritizing one or the other, that we've provided an option for licensing as well as single hauler, depending on the political appetite, I think is part of like the strategy for this plan, is knowing that there are different things that'll resonate with different people, and we have not decided anything. It's kind of the slow roll that Mayor Pro Tem Barr was talking about is really what we're gonna have to go for. So it's gonna be painfully slow, but that's how we'll get it done. So I think that's something that we could talk about as a board, about how do we wanna prioritize these? I can go through the plan and the data, and we could tee up really well for January to say, actually now throughout the fall, after we adopted this plan, we actually worked on a board. We looked at all this data. We wanna prioritize these different things. These are our recommendations. Council, what do you wanna do? We could have that type of study session and conversation, and I think it'd be really valuable.
Yeah.
But I think that needs to be internal until 2026, like internal to this board, into our conversations before bringing it in front of council, because they're gonna have a really hard time with the election if we put this on them before.
So really quickly, we're meeting with Next Gen tomorrow night, and they're gonna wanna know where we stand on this. So I can tell them where I stand, but I don't know so I'm not sure what you all.
What do y'all
want me to
think?
Tell them, or if anybody else is coming, but.
All of you are invited to come to the Next Gen
Pretty
meeting
much all of
tomorrow.
the above,
Do it all.
but single hauler would be preferable.
Do it all.
I'm curious why you picked single hauler over a group like 6 haulers, like.
So 8.4, require hauler licensing, including the requirement, would probably be, you could do a group. You can technically also have a single hauler and have multiple haulers by putting it out through districts. So you could say all of District 1 has a contract with Waste Management. All of District 2 has this other contract. There is a world in which that is still considered single hauler, significantly more complicated. But there are ways that you could also still let people choose by just having hauler licensing. But you can see at 8.4, the diversion impact between that and the diversion impact between support the transition to organized collection is different. But also it's combining all of these things. So like if we were to have a universal recycling ordinance, it goes hand in hand with an equal space ordinance. And so looking at how these things stack and work together, I think is important.
And presumably implementation of all of those different things is simpler if you do either 8.4 or 8.6, right? So like doing these single family resident like level.
I mean,
interventions
I would
are made
prefer to do
easier
that.
by-
I would prefer to choose, but it might just be, we just like really don't know who's gonna come out of nowhere and like, and so that's sort of why both are in there, is to say, we totally understand that we aren't the final deciding body. We're making recommendations based on this study that we've been doing and based on all of this other type of engagement. However, these are different options that will get to XYZ goal. It's having even 6 haulers would be better than 14, right? So thinking about putting that in there as like, this is also an option, was kind of where that is coming from. it was more political than anything else. That helps.
So something like explore adopting a universal recycling ordinance. Why? I would just like to get rid of explore.
So, I think the reason we have Explore is because it actually is considered like much more stringent and robust than a lot of these other recommendations. So we could change it to adopt. I think,
Is doomed to fail if you use adopt, is that?
I think it might go over a little softer with the word explore, and it doesn't mean that we can't adopt, right? But I think adding in language that makes it seem less have to do this, have to do that is helpful in this political moment.
And ultimately, city council will be the one that tells us which option they want to pursue, right?
I mean, so the hope is, I mean, I picked from like 50 options, Fred and I did. We talked about it, we talked with them, and these were the ones we picked. So these are actually a way smaller list than what we were presented with. And then they modeled it for each of the cities based on what we chose. And so this is actually a smaller list, way smaller list. And they're hoping that we'll go for all of these strategies at some point within this timeline. But the timeline goes out to 2040. So I mean, we're not saying we're doing all of this tomorrow, right? We're saying we're hoping these are strategies we can pursue. It also sets us up for further funding, so we can go back and get support from the state to do a contract, to do an equal space ordinance, to write that language, to figure out that policy. They provide that support.
I think like Hannah said, we should just support it all, right? And say, this is great, we support you, encourage it.
I'll tell Next Gen that tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah. we're on
Is
it.
anyone else coming to Next Gen?
I won't be able to, but I think this.
You and me.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. All right, well,
It's 8:31. Let me pull up anything else that needs to be announced by anybody.
Also
That's the list.
No, this person.
They did hire one?
What?
South Suburban.
South Suburban hired an executive director.
Oh, they did, finally.
who? Do you know anything? That's all we got.
I mean,
That's more than I do, so.
For reading the summary of their priorities, it wasn't. It obviously dovetails with our work. I don't.
Did we negotiate a contract with South Suburban yet? Is that still ongoing?
I've heard about, I think they wanted to wait until.
Yeah, they didn't want to pursue the conversation on their end. I don't know if you need to read this language before we. No, I don't think so.
think
No,
so.
We're good. All right.
Bye.
Brought it back up just in case.